Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to look at the FANG stocks, Tesla, Apple, Microsoft, Nvda, and others. Now, this week, we've received earnings from two of the FANG members, Tesla and Nflx, and the market reaction was negative for both of them. So we'll analyze what that means. Next week, we're going to have earnings from Microsoft and Google on Tuesday and Meta on Wednesday. We also have the FOMC on next Wednesday. So there's likely to be quite a bit of volatility next week. So let's just talk about what happened this week and what can we expect going forward. So you're looking at the daily chart of Tesla. You can see that since reaching a high of 300 right here, it fell quite sharply, gapped down on Thursday and continued weakness on Friday. Now, if you look at the structure since the rally started right here in May, Tesla had been making a series of daily higher lows. This one was the previous higher low. But this, sell-off changed that. In fact, Tesla has now made a lower low. So the sequence of higher low has been broken. So we now have a lower low on a daily basis. Also, if I bring in the moving averages just to see how they look like, so you can see that Tesla closed below the daily 20 EMA. The daily 20 EMA provided support, and it was above the daily 20 EMA during this rally. But it has now closed below the daily 20 EMA for 2 days in a row. So that's point number two. The third point I would make is that the RSI had closed just below the 50 level. RSI closed at 48.5. So it's closed underneath the 50 level. Generally, when it closes underneath the 50 level from the top, it is an indication that momentum is changing from positive to negative. And the longer it stays below the 50, usually we see weak price action. If you see right here, RSI fell below 50 and then it continued to move lower. During that time, we saw weak price action. It's only after at this level, at this point, RSI got back above the 50 level, and that's when we started to see positive price action. But sometimes what happens is that it dips below the 50 level for a very short period of time. You'll see right here, it stayed below for a short period of time. And even then, we saw some, sideways to lower price. So it's entirely possible that it could just reclaim the 50 level, in which case things should be fine. But at this point, it's worth noting that it is below the 50 level. And if if it continues to remain below the 50, then obviously, we should expect to see further weakness going forward. So based on, the price structure right now, the fact that it has made on a daily basis lower low, the fact that it's below the daily 20 EMA and RSI below 50, I'm beginning to see some weakness on a daily time frame. Right. So that said, let's have a look at the weekly time frame and what can we see. So on a weekly basis, obviously we have this candle right here, which is kind of bearish, I would say, because it traded above the previous weekly highs, but got rejected, and then it closed below the previous weekly low. So that looks kind of a weak, candle. But this one candle does not change the weekly structure, because if you look at the weekly structure, since forming this low, it made a weekly higher low right here, and then it continued to rally quite strongly. It's entirely possible that it is now entering a weekly consolidation period where it might be in search of a weekly higher low. So maybe it does something like this. If that's the case, then this structure then still will look positive. If you look to the left, let me make my point. So if you look to the left, when Tesla shares were rising right here, it doesn't continue to rise. It goes through period of weekly consolidation and then another leg up, another few weeks of consolidation, another leg up, another weeks of consolidation, another leg up. So, so it's entirely possible that Tesla is entering a period of weekly consolidation where we could expect to see, some further weakness, sideways, trading for over the course of several weeks, and in the process, it attempts to find another weekly higher low. Even if I look at the weekly moving averages, if I just bring in the moving averages and I get rid of the lines, you'll see that the moving average, the price remains above the moving averages on a weekly basis. And they've crossed and they're beginning to move higher. Even if, let's say, Tesla were to pull back and retest this level and then bounces off, there would be no technical damage done on a weekly time frame. So that's point number one. So weekly structure, I'm not seeing any kind of weakness as of now because the price remains above the weekly moving averages, and I'm not seeing it hasn't closed underneath this level. If so, then the sequence of weekly higher lows would be breached. If you look at the weekly momentum indicators, RSI was in an overbought territory, so it's pulled back, but it remains above the weekly 50 level, the critical 50 level. So I'm not seeing any break in RSI. MACD remains weekly above the zero line. So at this point, I'm not seeing any kind of weakness either in the price action or in the momentum indicators. Can it pull back further? Yes, as I mentioned that, within when a stock rallies, you do see weeks of consolidation, weeks of sideways, trading action, which I think is healthy. So at this point, I don't see any problem on a weekly time frame. So the way I reconcile, I don't see a problem on a weekly basis. I do see some weakness on a daily time frame. So the way I reconcile the two is that I would view this weakness to be temporary until such time as I see deterioration here. If I see a deterioration on a weekly time frame, then that would be more serious to me. But because I do not see any deterioration on the weekly time frame yet, I would expect, I would basically feel that the weakness I'm seeing on a daily time frame is temporary. All right. Now, if that's the case, let's have a look at, what are some of the levels we should be paying attention to. So if I just zoom out, first of all, I think that after this drop, some of the technical indicators are oversold on a smaller time frame. Like if you look at the 2-hour basis, or right here on a 2-hour basis, you can see that RSI is where is it, 31. It's an oversold condition. So I would definitely expect there to be some kind of a bounce coming in not too distant future. That's basically what I would expect. Now, if there is a bounce, what I'm looking for, because it has established a lower low, I'm looking to see whether it's going to form a lower high, whether it's going to do something like this. So if that's the case, then the structure on a daily basis might start to look like this. So that would be like a weak looking structure. So that's something that I'm keeping an eye on. Now, if there is a rebound and it moves back all the way up to this level, 300, then the threat of a lower high is removed. Then we don't have it, but I'm at least looking to see whether or not it's gonna form a lower high. If it forms a lower high, then I would expect a retest of this level or a break of this level. Now, on the downside, if there is a break of this level, what are some of the levels we should be looking out for? One would be this level right here, because the daily 50 is at this level. So this level is around 240. So if you look at the 2-hour chart, you can see clearly. So the 240 is right here. So effectively, what I'm saying is that if there is a rally and then it does something like this, maybe it comes back to this level right here, and if so, then the 200-day, the 50-day EMA comes into play. And if this level is breached, then obviously we have to talk about lower levels, but we're going too far ahead. So at the moment, what I'm thinking is that I'm expecting some kind of a bounce because on a short-term basis it's oversold. I am looking to see whether or not it's going to make a lower high. If so, then I would be looking for a downside move to this level, which is around 240. Now, even if it pulls back to 240, right? As I said, the daily chart might look bad, but the 240 doesn't, these moving averages, where are they? The moving averages are, so on a weekly basis, they're around 224, 220. The moving averages are right around here. So even if it pulls back to 240, it's not going to do any damage to price action on a weekly basis. These moving averages around 218, 224, right? Which is where this previous breakout level is. So even if it pulls back to this, these breakout level on a weekly basis, the weekly structure still remains positive, fine to me. I don't see any problem. But what's going to happen is that you look at the daily basis, that's not going to look good. The 224 is right here, right around here. So if it falls to this level, let me just draw a horizontal line so you can see. So even if it pulls back to this level, your daily chart might look terrible because the price would be below the daily 20, the daily 50, and it's gonna pull back to this level. But all it does on a weekly basis is it's pulling back to this breakout level, So I still think that things are fine. Yes, on a daily basis, it will look weak. But as long as there are no technical breakdown in price action and momentum on a weekly basis, I think this pullback is going to be temporary. And I'm going to leave it at that. So we'll come back to Tesla next week and see what it looks like. But as I said, I am seeing some weakness, so we should be a little bit careful. But I do think that there is an opportunity for a bounce, but I want to see whether it forms a lower high. Moving on, let's look at Netflix. Netflix to me looks very similar to Tesla, because if you look at the price action, it's been moving higher above the 20 EMA. This drop basically pushed it below the daily 20, and it also formed a daily lower high. So this was the previous daily low. So it has now formed a lower low on a daily basis. So the question is, if we do have a bounce, whether or not it's going to form a lower high. Let's say it bounces up to this level. If so, then the structure might look something like this. So that would be a weak looking structure. But if you look at the weekly basis, Netflix, where is weekly? Here's a weekly basis. Let me get rid of the moving averages for a second. So you can clearly see that it's been making a series of higher lows, right? And this was the previous higher low. So this weekly candle, although it's bearish, it hasn't broken the structure yet. This was the previous breakout level. So even if it pulls back to this level and retests it, the weekly structure still should be fine. If it does something like this, I think that would be quite constructive. It's entirely possible that after this run up, it goes through several weeks of consolidation. So I'm not seeing any breakdown at this point. If you look at the RSI was overbought. It has pulled back. It remains well above the 50 level. MACD remains above the zero line. So on a weekly basis also, at this point, I'm not yet seeing any weakness. I am seeing some weakness on a daily basis. So I'm willing to say that this weakness is temporary. But if this continues to weaken and in the process the weekly pattern starts to look negative, then obviously I would say that no, this weakness, it's going to take some time to repair. So given that, what are some of the levels we should be looking out for? Certainly the 50-day moving average, the daily 50-day, where is that? That's around 413. So that's around this level right here. So look for this swing low right here. So that's basically where the daily 50 is. If this level is breached, then I would be looking at some of these levels right here, around 400, 380. But we're not there yet. So let's just see what happens, whether this level is breached. As long as this level doesn't breach, then these other levels don't come into play. But I would basically look to see whether or not, if there's any rally, whether it makes a lower high. If it does that, then I would basically focus on this level. So that's Tesla. Let's look at Microsoft on a daily basis. So if you look at Microsoft, so let's look at Microsoft on a smaller times scale. So this is a 2-hour chart. You'll notice that there was a news on Microsoft about Microsoft charging for $30 per user for their AI related searches, and then you see there was this big rally. So this happened when? So this happened on Tuesday, and Microsoft has given back all of that. So obviously, and it looked like it was going to break out this level, which is 351. But it has fallen below this level. So let's quickly have a look at the structure on a daily basis. So on a daily basis, you can see that the price action is still quite is positive. You can see that the series of higher lows. This was the previous daily low. So it's still above this. The price is above the daily 20 EMA. You can see the daily 20 EMA has been good to the stock. It hasn't breached that level. So, but I am seeing some weakness in momentum. You can see that MACD is gradually moving lower, but it's still above, RSI is still above 50. So Microsoft's technical picture is not as bad as Tesla and Netflix on a daily basis. The weekly also seems fine. If you look at the Microsoft on a weekly basis, yes, this is a bearish looking candle, but there is no technical damage yet. If you look at the structure, this was the last weekly higher low, and since then it has rallied quite a bit. So there is an opportunity for maybe on a weekly basis for it to establish another weekly high. So if it goes through few weeks of consolidation, pullback, is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't think so. So it made an attempt to overcome this previous all-time high on a closing basis, but it hasn't done so. So I'm not seeing any kind of technical damage yet. So on a weekly basis, if it were to pull back and retest this level and does something like this, I think that would be quite healthy and constructive, because Microsoft needs to take a bit of a break, because it's gone up quite a bit, and you can see that RSI is overbought. Maybe some kind of consolidation pullback basically brings it back from this overbought. It remains above 50. So I'm not seeing any kind of weakness on a weekly time frame just yet. Even on a daily basis, even if it pulls back, what are some of the levels I'm looking at? So the levels I would be interested would be this 50-day moving average. If it breaks below the 20 EMA, the next level I would be interested is in the 50 EMA, which is around 329. You can see that there's still quite a bit of support right here. You can see it clearly on a 2-hour time frame. So on a 2-hour time frame, you can see the structure right here. So right now we are at a support level right here. If this level is breached, then I would look at this level right here, which is around 327. And finally to this low right here, which is around 323. So those would be the levels I would be looking out for. And if there is a rebound, so I would look to see whether there is a rejection at this level right here, which is around 352. If not, whether it rises and forms a lower high underneath this level. So this is now 366. So it's entirely possible that Microsoft does something like this and forms a lower high on a daily basis. But at this point, the price action, momentum indicators are still positive and better than Tesla and Netflix. But Microsoft reports earnings next Tuesday. Now things may change. If that happens, then obviously I'll come back and with an update. So let's look at Nvda next. So here's Nvda. Nvda again. So since rising to this level, which is around 480, so Nvda has been pulling back. So this is the previous breakout level right here. You can see that the 20 EMA is also at this level. So I would expect, so this would be the first level I'm watching to see if there's any kind of bounce. If so, I want to see whether there is any possibility of a lower high, whether it does something like this. If it rises up to this level, the previous high, then there's no threat of a lower high. But I want to see whether or not I would be looking out to see whether it forms a lower high. If so, then I would think that this level would be at risk. The next significant level is around 400, which is where this low is. That's where the daily 50 EMA is sitting. Now, on a daily basis, the momentum indicators are still positive. You can see that RSI is still above the 50 level. So that's good. MACD is beginning to move lower, but still remains above 50. So we'll have to see how things play out in coming days, with regards to the momentum indicators. If I look at the weekly basis, let's see, where is Nvda? So there's Nvda. So obviously this candle looks weak. It tried to rose as high as this one, but it hasn't at least closed below this last week's candle. If Nvidia moves below last week's low, which is around 441, then expect further weakness on a weekly basis. The downside target is this 400 again, which is where this weekly candle is sitting. But if you look at the RSI is overbought. It's around 82. So if it consolidates and pulls back further, it does not change any of the it doesn't affect the weekly structure, because the weekly structure is quite strong. So I'm not seeing any sort of weakness as of now. On a weekly basis, the daily still looks fine to me. Even if it breaks the 20 EMA and pulls back, it might look a little bit weak on a daily basis, especially if RSI dips. But as long as the weekly price action momentum indicators remains positive, I would think that Nvidia's weakness on a daily basis would be temporary. But these would be the levels I'm watching: the 400 on the downside, and then 440, and obviously there would be some support in the middle. Like if you look at the 2-hour chart, then there will be other levels in between. But the big picture is 440 on the upside and then 400 on the downside. So those would be the two levels I'm watching. If I look at Meta next, so here's Meta. So let's just get rid of the levels first. So you can see that Meta has been on a very strong uptrend, and that it's been rising along the 20 EMA. It has provided support right here, right here, right here. It hasn't touched the 20 EMA for a while. It closed this week just below the 20 EMA. So there's, you might say, some weakness beginning to creep up. You can see that MACD is crossed, but it remains well above the zero line. So I'm not seeing anything concerning. RSI is just above 50. So I'm watching RSI. You can see last time RSI came to this level, it bounced. So I'm not seeing, so there is some weakness on a price action basis, but momentum indicators are still fine to me. On a weekly basis, obviously, despite the weakness, I'm not seeing any kind of sell-off right now. Now, the weekly candle obviously doesn't look positive. So the question is whether there could be further weakness and maybe pull back to this level and then does something like this. I think that would be helpful. That would be positive because since the last higher low right here, it hasn't formed any kind of weekly consolidation. You might say this could be a very small consolidation right here. So if it does something like this, the weekly structure will still remain positive. You can see that RSI is way overbought, so maybe some consolidation brings it closer to the 50 level. MACD remains well above. So I'm not seeing any sort of weakness in Meta either on the price action or momentum on a weekly basis at this point. But I do know that there's some weakness in price action on a daily basis. Now, if there's further weakness, I'm looking at the daily 50 EMA, which is at the moment around 276. So if I bring in some of the levels, so in terms of, so if I get rid of the moving averages, so you can see the levels. So, this would be an area that I'm looking at right here, which is, what number is that? It's around 290. So if 290 is breached, then potentially 260 could be the downside. Why 260? If you take this distance, and you double it, that's the 260. So that would be if there is a full measured move to the downside. But sometimes it doesn't happen. There's also some support around here, which is around 275. So I'm just looking at some of the levels that, I'm interested in. So 290 if there's further consolidation. But because, Tesla has been down for a while, like if you look at Tesla on a 2-hour basis, sorry, not Tesla, what am I saying? Meta. So if you look at Meta on a 2-hour basis, you can see that it's quite oversold on a 2-hour basis because, it's been pulling back from around 320. So it's quite oversold. So I would expect some kind of a bounce. So first level is whether this area is going to act as a resistance if there is a bounce, which is around 305. Second thing I'm watching is whether it's going to form a lower high. After forming this high, whether it's going to form a lower high. So that would be the next thing I'm watching. Now, if it rebounds all the way up to here, then there is no threat of a lower high, but it's something to keep an eye on. And if so, so this is the 290, because the 290, you can see there was a lot of interaction at this level. So if 290 is breached, then obviously this level comes into play. So this level is so this is around 275, and ultimately this level right here, which is around 260. So 260 would be basically if we have a full measured move, but along the way there would be other supports. So those would be the levels I'm keeping an eye on Meta. So moving on to next, I want to look at Google. So here's Google. So let's look at the daily chart of Google. So there's the daily chart of Google, right? So you can see that it's been in a consolidation mode basically since reaching this level. In terms of moving averages, it's kind of hovering around its daily 20 and 50 EMA. You can see the momentum indicator is kind of weak. You can see RSI is below 50. It's been going up and above and below. MACD is just near the zero line. It hasn't crossed, so I'm watching to see if it crosses. So in terms of so that's basically its daily structure. I'll have more to say if we look at the Google's weekly. So on a weekly basis, so you can see that it has it's been forming a series of weekly higher low. maybe this is going to be a weekly higher low. It's not yet confirmed. It needs to get back above this level for this to be a confirmed weekly higher low. So you can clearly see that the weekly structure is still quite constructive. Weekly RSI is about 50. MACD remains above the zero line. So I'm not yet seeing any kind of weakness either on the price action or the momentum indicators on a weekly basis. If I bring in the weekly moving averages, let me just hide the levels. You can clearly see that the price action, the price is above the weekly 20 and 50 as well as the 200-day moving averages. So everything seems fine on a weekly basis, but I am seeing some kind of a what's the best way to describe consolidation on a daily basis. I wouldn't say that the price action is negative. Momentum indicators are neutral to negative, I would say. So in terms of, so if there is any further weakness, I'm watching this level right here. So this is the previous low right here, which is around 115. So it closed at 120. So 116, it's actually 116. So that's the level I'm watching on the downside first. If there is further weakness, then I'm watching this level right here, because you can see that there was quite a bit of support right here. So this level is around 110. So 116 and then 110, I'm looking on the downside. And then on the upside, I'm looking at 127. So overall, I would say that although the daily picture may not be as bullish, but I'm not seeing any sort of weakness on the weekly chart at this point. So that's Google in my opinion. And I'm going to finish off with Apple. So let's look at Apple. So let's just remove everything first of all. So let's look at the moving averages. Now, if you look at Apple, I have this channel right here. So Apple has been moving inside this channel. It still remains. It hasn't breached those channels yet. And as long as it remains inside this channel, there's nothing to worry. But in case it does break below, what are some of the levels we should be looking out for? So first of all, if you look at the moving averages, so let me just remove all of the so if you look at the moving averages, Apple remains above the daily 20. You can see the daily 20 has been quite good to Apple. Number of times it has rallied and then found support at the daily 20. The daily 20 is around 190. It closed around 192 on Friday. So it's still above $2 above the daily 20. So that would be the first level I'm looking at. But if this daily 20 is breached, then I'm looking at this level right here, because this was the last daily higher low, because you can see higher lows. So this is the daily higher low. So what level is that? So that's around 186. So that would be the next level I'm watching. And underneath that, I'm looking at the daily 50, which is this line right here. And that's around 183. So those would be the levels I'm looking at. Now, if I look at the weekly basis on Apple, so let's bring up Apple right here. So on a weekly basis, if I look at Apple, so on a weekly basis, you can see that since forming this weekly higher low, so this was the low, it hasn't formed, hasn't consolidated, it has just gone straight up. So can it basically form some kind of a weekly higher low consolidation for a few weeks, something like this, where it basically it pulls back, goes sideways for a period of time? I think that would be healthy. So if so, what are some of the levels on a weekly basis we should be paying attention to? Well, first of all, this is one area of interest right now on a weekly basis. So this is 186. We talked about 186 on a daily basis. But let's say if it were to have a deeper pullback and pulls back to this level right here, which is around 176, all it does is that it comes and touches the weekly 20 EMA. If it does something like this and then rallies, I mean, does that change the weekly structure? Absolutely not. Let me show you something else. If I look to the left, right, when Tesla was rallying after the COVID sell-off, right? You see that from time to time it does. It came down and touched the weekly 20 right here. Another rally again came and touched the weekly 20. It consolidated around weekly 20, weekly 20, weekly 20. So you see that when it was rallying in 2021 and 2022, from time to time it would pull back and touch the weekly 20. So it has a history of doing that. So if if Apple were to pull back and touch the weekly 20, does that indicate any weakness? I don't think so, because weekly 20 to me is like a mean reversion. It's like an equilibrium point. So it would be quite normal and healthy for Apple to go through a few weeks of consolidation, especially because it hasn't done any sort of meaningful consolidation for quite some time. The last one being in March and April, where you see several weeks it basically traded in a narrow range. So if it does something like this, I think it would be quite healthy. So and if you look at the momentum indicators on a weekly basis, RSI is in overbought area. So any weekly consolidation basically means it also pulls back from an overbought level. MACD remains above the zero level. So on a weekly basis, I don't see any sort of weakness in Apple. But I would say that some kind of a consolidation for a few weeks would be healthy in my opinion, without breaking anything on a weekly basis. What that basically means that the daily chart might look weak, but I think that would be temporary, which is fine. I don't see a problem with that. And that basically means that maybe after a few weeks of consolidation, we can expect to see higher prices again. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching the video. You can follow me on Twitter, because I do provide updates during market hours. So if I see anything interesting, I do put it out in my Twitter feed. Also, you could consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Well, thank you very much. I hope to see you again in a future video.